Okay, now I'm going to look at chaining promises. Promises can be chained. So one example would be to introduce another promise and plug it in to the callback mechanism. So the data from the promise gets piped. Well, I'm going to say filtered into this other promise here. So here I say I have a tell friends function with a toy argument, which means I'm going to plug this thing in so that the toy that's resolved from the first promise gets plugged into this promise, and then this promise function executes. So in the event that Dad did resolve and fulfill the toy for his son, then here I basically take that information, the fact that we fulfilled the promise, the previous promise, and I say, Dad bought me a new toy, and here's the toy color and the toy brand, and I basically log the message, and then I resolve that. And then when I do find the result and I consume that promise, what I do is I say, oh, tell friends about it. And this then with the tell friends is called a chain. What I've done is I plugged in that promise so that resolved value gets plugged into this callback chain. And I tell my friends and I log the good news, or I could log the good news and tell my friends. You could switch these things. Of course, if there's a message, an error message, I have to log the reasoning behind the rejection. In which case, I'm not going to tell my friends. But but basically, when you execute the find result, the promise functions get executed, and the data propagates through the resolve to the next promise resolve through the callback function, etc. So let's take a look at that example real quick. Okay, so I have a function which I've called chain. I begin the chain. I say, is Dad employed? I define a promise where this function executes resolve and reject. If Dad's employed, I define a toy. I resolve the toy. Now that resolution can go in different places. It's going to go to the callback, the dot then, but it could also go through the dot then going through another promise, which is chained. So let's take a look at that scenario. I have a tell friends function which is called toy, and it instantiates a promise, and then what I do is I resolve that function, and I let the message be Dad bought me a new toy, and I log the message, and then I resolve that message. And then I return that promise. Now, here's the thing that bothers me about promises is the wide variety of things you could do and the structure and the different ways you can code it up, and it gets to be too confusing, and I don't particularly like that, okay? But it's good because um, it beats a lot of the nesting that we might have done with Angular 1. So you have to write clean code, and what I could say right now is this is not as clean as I want it to be, and it doesn't really even accomplish really what I want it to do. So what we'll do is, instead of confusing you, let me just move on and show you the example. Okay, so here we do a find result. We're consuming the promise, and we do then we get the good news, we log the good news, and then we tell friends. And in the event is there, and so really the tell friends is the chain, right? So this is the thing I wanted to show you, that after we get the good news, then we could tell friends, and we get a handle on that resolved value. So then I execute the find result, and then I do a console log end chain. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. Let me clear up my console, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute this chain. Okay, so some stuff's going on here. Okay, so I begin chain. I'm inside the promise. This is my toy value. And then I log the toy value during the resolution. And I also tell my friends, Dad bought me a new toy. So let's do it again. There's no timers here, so things are happening very quickly, but it's asynchronous, and there's callbacks and stuff like that. And like in particular, the begin chain, the end chain happened, and I did manage to log the toy. It got resolved. I tell my friends that Dad bought me a new toy. And so let's go through it once more. The chain. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll change the value to false. My code transpiles, re-renders, and then I click on chain. Begin chain, end chain. Dad is not employed. Son will not get toys. Okay, so now the confusing thing about the example is that really when the toy got resolved, let's go back to the successful case here. When the toy got resolved, and I chained here, I should get an access to that toy that came in, the resolution, in this resolve. And I believe that there's different ways to do that to make it happen. But what I didn't do here was I didn't get a handle on my toy and display. All I did was brag about it, that Dad bought me a toy. I should have said Dad bought me a PlayStation, whatever. So keep that in mind, that in our next example we'll show something that's a little bit more clear. But keep in mind that when you're working with these promises and you're chaining, you're really trying to get the resolved value into the next function and process that. And that's why I was pointing out here what went wrong with when I was trying to do this example. We have this scoped toy here, and we have a consumption here as opposed to just a plain old promise. So you fool around, try to figure out how to log this toy that's coming into this second promise, and determine the best way to do that. Because I think I tried 3 different things and I've had some issues, and I moved this thing around, and there were some issues I was having. Even I think switching this tell friends to before here. So anyway, do a little research, try to figure out what's going on there. Let's move on to our next example. Once again, chain.